we have done more than 3,000 wills, trust, beneficiary designations of retirement plans. And sometimes, again, I tend to be quantitative and I think about these numbers, but I've been an estate attorney for more than 35 years. And many of the wills and trusts and beneficiary designations that we did 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. Typically, although it varies broadly, but typically our average client, when we meet them, tend to be maybe in their 60s or 70s. And that was also true 30 years ago. So we met a lot of people, we did their estate plans, we did their IRAs, et cetera, et cetera. And now, unfortunately, many of these people are dying. And I remember a lot of the people, and when we have our weekly meeting, we always kind of go through who died, and it's frankly a tiny part of me dies each time that a client dies, because I do remember them as vital, healthy, wonderful people. But the consolation is that we got the estate plan right. And we're taking care of the family, we're taking care of the surviving spouse, we're taking care of the kids, often saving tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes more than $1 million for the survivors. And that's frankly the best that we can do. So we try to, I throw in some health information for those of you who follow my stuff, because that's one of my passions. And I sometimes share that, including, for example, my own experience with stem cells. But ultimately, the greatest contribution is the feeling that these people have had from the time that we did their retirement and estate plans until they died, that yes, they are doing as much as they could for their family. And then after they die, actually helping the family implement many of the strategies that we had set up before they died. So this, even though we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and the math and things like that, again, I urge you to think this isn't just numbers and math, but it's actually people and its quality of life, which I think is so important, and frankly is what motivates me and motivates both our CPAs as well as our estate attorneys. So we're going to talk about what I consider the best estate plan for most married IRA and retirement plan owners. It is nothing new. It is something that I have been doing in practice since the mid-90s, believe it or not, way before it was popular or had a name or anything else. But it's still what I believe is the best estate plan for most married IRA and retirement plan owners. We're going to talk about how expensive it is if you do nothing, and particularly with the Secure Act. And we're going to get into some of the details of, and many of you have heard this before if you've been with me, Lange's Cascading Beneficiary Plan, which I can't understand why it is not much more uniformly used among the profession. But it's still a relative rarity, although more and more people are switching to it, and what the value and the benefits are to you and your family. We're going to get into a couple of advanced strategies, just like I did this morning. One of the advanced strategies is called Who Gets What. This is going to apply to both non-charitable and charitable beneficiaries, and it's also going to apply if your children are in different financial positions, or to be more accurate, are in different tax brackets. I don't know anybody well, some people are doing the first one. I don't know any estate attorneys who are doing the second one. And again, it's one of those things that can save a couple $100,000. And it also applies between leaving money to a spouse or to a child. We're also going to talk a little bit about charitable remainder trusts as beneficiaries of an IRA, which have taken on a new life, even just this starting in 2023, when the It's called the 75/20 rate, and I'm not going to go into details at this moment, goes up significantly, which is going to give the lifetime beneficiary, which is likely your child or children, a much higher payout and less money going to the charity, which, if that is your goal, can be really interesting. So we now have a new energy on charitable remainder trusts as beneficiaries of IRAs and retirement plans. We have some cool bonuses. If you stay till the bloody end, if you will, both announced and unannounced, we do have allowed time for questions, both the dedicated all question, which I believe that it starts at 4 Eastern and goes till 5, but we're also going to take some questions throughout. So let's talk about the elephant in the room for estate taxes and estate planning. If you're an IRA person, meaning that you have as much or more money in your IRA, 401k, 403b, SEP-KEO, etc., as you have outside your IRA, your biggest tax problem is the taxes on that IRA or retirement plan, either while you're alive or after you're gone, or more likely both. That is going to be your biggest tax problem. And don't forget that, because people get tied up in the wrong things. They get tied up, oh, you need a living trust and you need to avoid probate. Well, I'm not saying that you shouldn't avoid probate, but that doesn't save a nickel in taxes. The strategies that we're going to talk about can potentially save hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. So the biggest issue that most of you have is this untaxed money that will someday be taxed, unless, again, you leave it to a charity or charitable remainder trust, which is a more interesting option than most people think. And it became interesting after the Secure Act, and it became even more interesting after the 75/20 rate went way up. So what is the best estate plan? We are going to talk about it, and we're going to present the solution. But, and it's not because I'm trying to tease you, it's because the solution wouldn't make a lot of sense unless I give you the background. So we are going to do the background. And by the way, some of this background is classic tax training that is really more than estate planning. It's some tax classics that so few people even know, or even fewer implement. Then we're going to talk about the concepts of the plan, and then we're going to see why it has such universal appeal and why we are getting all types of testimonials from so many luminaries on how wonderful this plan works and where this plan has been published. And then, of course, the plan itself. Okay, so I promised some of the bedrock principles. So this is beyond estate planning. This is classic tax planning. Don't pay taxes now, pay taxes later, except for the Roth. And if you were here for the first session, we even made an exception to that. We're going from the taxable to the tax-free environment. But let's leave that one aside. Let's just keep with our second principle, which is don't pay taxes later, which was the first, except for Roth and Roth IRA conversions, which is the second. And we're going to leave the third one out, at least for this conversation. That applies in the accumulation stage. That is while you are still working. Don't pay taxes now, pay taxes later, except the Roth. What does that mean? That means put money into your retirement plans, get a deduction. Better yet, put money that is matched into your retirement plan, then put money in HSAs, which are even better than Roths, then traditional retirement plan in the accumulation stage. That's the quick subject to exception recommendations. The distribution stage. So now you are retired. To oversimplify, you have 3 sources of money to draw from. One is your IRA and retirement plan. 2 is your Roth IRA and Roth money that you've already converted to a Roth, or money that's in a Roth. And 3, plain old after-tax dollars And if you wanted to, you could add a fourth, which is highly appreciated after-tax dollars. And again, subject to exception, I would spend the after-tax dollars first, the highly appreciated after-tax dollars next, the IRA dollars next, and the Roth IRA last. Subject to exception, that's the classic best order to spend money in the distribution stage, and we're actually going to go through a little bit of math in that. And another thing that's important to keep in mind is don't pay taxes now, pay taxes later, except for the Roth, even after you're dead. So this Bedrock tax principle applies to both the living, the accumulation, the distribution, and even after you're gone. And then I mentioned that last exception, which is moving from the tax-free environment to the, from the tax-deferred to the tax-free, which we covered in the Roth workshop. And by the way, if you missed that, I think we're going to give you a chance to see that again. I think we leave that up for a day or two. Okay, and that's where you cashed in some IRA money, you paid the tax, and you had your heirs invest in something tax-free, like a 529, or their own Roth 401k, their own health savings plan, or life insurance. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the Secure Act, but since this is estate planning for IRAs and retirement plans, we have to talk about it again because this is just so miserable. And it was advertised as something that was good for taxpayers. And I would maintain, and I have the math to prove it, that for IRA and retirement plan owners, the Secure Act, should be called the Confiscation of IRA and Retirement Plan Owners Act, or Heirs of IRA Owners Act, because that's really what it is. I went through this slide, so I'm not going to beat this up again because I did it this morning, but the old rules were, or if you qualify for one of the exceptions, is shown in the solid green line, which is you die, your kid then stretches the inherited IRA, which they could before the Secure Act, or if they meet one of the exceptions, and given those, they have over $2 million when they're in their 80s, compared to the current law, which instead of having $2 million, they have nothing. So this is, if you have a lot of money, like $1 million or more in an IRA or retirement plan, this act is pure misery. And between the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 with promised tax increases and the Secure Act, you have to be proactive or you're just going to get crushed. The exceptions, the spouse, qualifying charitable trusts, which have a much higher, let's say, degree of attention, as they should, both after the Secure Act and after the significant raise in the Section 7520 Act, which is going to make it much more favorable than it was even a year ago. I think I mentioned the 10 years younger exception and the disabled and chronically ill beneficiary, which I mentioned that I have a daughter who has a disability because we were able to do we qualified her for SSDI. B, we did a series of Roth IRA conversions, actually starting more than 20 years ago. And C, we got the estate planning right. Because we did those three things for her, she will be $1.9 million better off, not including the government benefits, which could potentially be a lot, particularly if you have a child who, maybe could go to college or go to a graduate school or qualify for special programs or vocation training, et cetera, which is the benefit of qualifying for SSI or SSDI. Again, doing Roth conversions, which is so cool for a beneficiary who has a disability, and then getting the estate planning right. I mentioned we have a dedicated website to that, which if you have a child or grandchild with a disability or know someone who does, I would highly recommend that you go to that website. It is disabledchildplanning.com. Again, disabledchildplanning.com. We put together a dream team of the best person in the country, I believe, to talk about qualifying your child for SSI, SSDI, She is a national force, a national expert, was part of the H.W. Bush administration, one of the writers of Disability Act of 1990, has two children who are Paralympic champions, including Tatiana McFadden, who has 20 gold medals. Anyway, I'm going on a little bit further than I should. That website is up. It doesn't have all the latest and greatest. If they go back in about a week, it hopefully will, but that's disabledchildplanning.com. That's one of the exceptions. Minor children, but that only lasts till age 21. And so here's the deal. Back in the early 90s, when I read about, let's say, what makes up the basis for the type of planning I was doing, I just thought it was such a good idea. And I could find very little support for it, but it just made intuitive sense to me. So I started doing it. I started drafting them. In the plans, if you look back to the plans that I've drafted in the mid 90s and beyond, that had elements, if not the complete variation of, or some variation of what we are drafting now. And a lot of people died with these plans and it worked out very well. So in 1998, I was doing a peer review article for the Tax Advisor. And the article was really about Roth IRA conversions because I wrote the first peer review article on Roth IRA conversions. And I thought, just for the heck of it, I'm just going to put in a little bit about what I was doing for estate planning. And the peer reviewers loved it. They said, oh, expand that section. So I did. So I actually got peer reviewed from the AICPA support for what I was kind of doing on my own for IRA and retirement plan owners for their estate plans. I wrote an article about it in 2001, and I got a call that day from Jane Bryan Quinn, who, she's now retired, but she was one of the great financial journalists of our time, her and Jonathan Clemens. And by the way, I was probably on the phone with Jane for probably about 6 to 8 hours for a one-page article in Newsweek. That's old school. And Jonathan Clemens was the same way. They were great researchers. They didn't write it if they didn't understand it. And they didn't mind spending hours and hours on the phone going over something, which is much different than most financial journalists today, although some are good. But anyway, she thought this solution was the best thing since sliced bread. She wrote about it and she put it in Newsweek in 2001. The Wall Street Journal picked up on it, and I was in the Wall Street Journal, and this plan was in the Wall Street Journal. It was in Kiplinger's, and then it was in the Wall Street Journal again. It was kind of a retrospect. Hey, we wrote about this years ago. What has happened to this plan, or why are more and more estate planning attorneys using it? I included it in all my Retire Secure books in 2006 and 2009, 2015. First two published by Wiley, last one self-published, and then the most recent one, which is, I believe, the best book I ever wrote, which is Retire Secure for Professors. And even if you're not a professor, 90 or 95% of the content is still appropriate for IRA and retirement plan owners. I put it in Beating the New Death Tax, which I believe is one of your bonuses in addition to Retire Secure for Professors, again, digital and hard copy. And we've done about 3,000 estate plans, wills, beneficiary designations, IRAs, et cetera, since the mid-90s, and many of these people have died. So this isn't wild cowboy stuff. This is proven. We have gobs of support, testimonials from lots of people, and a long history of drafting them and then doing the estate administration after people died. Now, interestingly, so my daughter's a real math whiz, and I was trying to kind of prepare long-term projections for the law firm. And I said, Erica, so, obviously with no names and no medical information, but we do know how old our clients are. How many deaths should we anticipate per year? And she came up with a much higher number. than we actually experienced. Why is that? Well, our clients live longer than the average people. Now, I'd love to say, oh, that's because they're so happy, because they're so relaxed, because they have their retirement and estate planning and their money is so much better. But I think really people who are smart about taking care of their money tend to be smart about their health. They tend to exercise more, and they tend to use seatbelts, and they don't smoke cigarettes, et cetera, et cetera. But that said, we've still had a lot of deaths with these plans in place. And obviously, it's tragic when somebody dies. But as I mentioned earlier, let's say one of the compensating factors is known how much money you have saved the family and how much you have helped the family. So what is, let's say, the essence of the plan, or what is the result of it? Well, first, nobody in the history of the world that I know of has come in to a law firm and said, here's my plan. I want my grandchildren so stinking rich that they never have to work a day in their life. I don't think anybody in the history of the world ever said that. They are interested, at least in my experience, particularly for what I call Leave It to Beaver couple, original husband, original wife, same kids. They're interested in providing for their surviving spouse. That's number one. They talk about that. The first thing is that we are both provided for during our joint lives. Second thing is, I want to make sure that the spouse is okay after I die. Then we talk about saving taxes and kids and grandkids, et cetera, et cetera. And again, one of the results of this plan is to protect or overprotect the surviving spouse, but at the same time, leave options to save potentially tens, hundreds of thousands. And we've saved people well over $1 million by setting up and then after death implementing the plan. And again, I like to think in terms of numbers, and I sometimes overlook the quality of life that these numbers mean. The difference between your kid having $2 million and your kid having no money, that's more than a number in the bank. That is financial security versus potentially being homeless. And I think it's going to be harder and harder for our kids to get a good job and a pension and be there 20 years or 40 years and build up a big 401k. So I think that this is very, very important. And I've been teaching this in this plan since the mid-90s. I've been teaching it to attorneys who, I better watch myself. I don't want to say anything bad. I see a lot of bad estate planning from attorneys. We're not very happy with the vast majority of wills, trusts, and more importantly, beneficiary designations of retirement plans, even from big firms that have great reputations. You'd think that they would do better. I've been teaching this to CPAs, I've been teaching this to financial advisors, and I continue to teach to all three groups. Typically, they're getting continuing education credit. Hopefully, they are learning and implementing. Some of them I know are just there for the credit, but hopefully some of them are listening and actually learning, and more importantly, implementing. And I've taught this to, again, tens of thousands of consumers. And if you include digital outreach and books, probably hundreds of thousands. So what is let's say, the elephant in the room? What is the biggest problem about estate planning? Assuming that the estate attorney knows what they're doing and assuming that you know what you're doing. The biggest issue is uncertainty. We just don't know what's going to happen. What will the law be when you die? We have a much, much different tax environment now than we did before the Secure Act, which was just a couple of years ago. Radically different. That calls for completely different planning. What will the law be like? Who's going to die first? Typically, we assume the husband's going to die first because us men typically have shorter life expectancies. That doesn't always work that way. So you can plan for the husband to die first, but what if the wife dies first? Does that screw up your plans? Does that change things around? How much money will you have? People are always worried about, oh, what happens if I get sick? Oh, what happens if the market goes down? Oh, and they're overrun with these fears of dying broke. And I, of course, try to say, well, that's not statistically likely. And I try to encourage people to spend money, particularly for family vacations and functions and things like that. But what if you're right? What if the last illness is really expensive? What if the market does go down? And what if you have provided too much money for your child and not enough for your spouse? That could be horrendous. And we said before, the first thing is to protect or overprotect the surviving spouse. And what are the needs of the survivors? You know, sometimes one kid's doing really well and the other kid's doing really badly. And it turns out, no, between the time that you draft the documents and the time that you die, the kid who's doing really well isn't doing well, and the kid who's doing not well is doing really well. And maybe one, married somebody who, let's say, is going to take advantage of them financially, and the other one who married and somebody who is going to be so what are the needs of the survivors? Where are the survivors going to be? What will the tax rates be, both federal tax and state tax? Where will you die? All right. A lot of times people assume they're going to die in the state that they are now. We have a lot of people now, particularly being in a mature business where many of our clients started with us in their 60s and 70s and now in their 80s and 90s. Many of them are no longer Pennsylvania residents, and they're going to die in a state that has a different tax structure than Pennsylvania, sometimes better like Florida or Texas, and sometimes a lot worse like California or New York. Where will your survivors live? That makes a big difference on how you should potentially plan. And are you going to move? One person, we saved a ton of money because we made massive Roth conversions while they were a Florida resident right before they moved to California, which taxes IRAs and inherited IRAs. And just kind of being smart about future residents will save literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And finally, if you know us, you know that we love to do projections. We love to do the math. We love to carry it out, not only for your life, but for your kid's life, et cetera, et cetera. And we've done thousands of them. Every single one was wrong. That's a confession, because the assumptions that we use, and by the way, we use what we think is reasonable, but we're happy to use anything that you do. So somebody can say, hey, you assume 6%. What if it's 4%? What if it's 10%? What if we take a 30% hit this year, but then the market normalizes? What if the kids are in an equal tax bracket? So we do all these projections, and we still think that they're very valuable to do, but we've never hit it to the dollar or even close, because something that we didn't think was going to happen happened. So we take our best shot, but we're not there.